Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reaching Higher podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Strout, and I've got to tell you, this next episode came to me the best way ones always do, through a friend. If you've been listening for a while, you'll remember Phyllis Ferrell from a few episodes back, Alzheimer's advocate, all-around force of nature. Well, Phyllis is also apparently my unofficial casting director now, because she's the one who put James and Nancy Keach in my path. And she didn't just make the introduction and disappear. No. Phyllis went full Let's Hang, that's Amy Poehler's podcast, on me. She joined me on the show and gave me the inside scoop on James and Nancy before providing a couple of really smart questions. Phyllis, if you're listening, thank you. Also, you're hired. So, who are James and Nancy Keach? Let's start with James because his story is one of those Hollywood family sagas you couldn't make up. Born into it, sort of, his father, Stacy Keach Sr., was a drama coach and actor, his mother an actress, and his older brother is the great Stacy Keach. Both parents actually pushed James and his brother toward doctor and lawyer respectability. It didn't take. James went to Northwestern, then Yale School of Drama, and came out the other side a classically trained actor, good enough to headline as Jesse James in 1980's The Long Riders, which he also co-wrote and produced. But if you know James' name, there's a good chance it's from the other side of the camera. He spent decades as a director and producer, and along the way became genuinely close with Johnny Cash and June Carter. Close enough that Cash personally asked him to help Shepard walk the line to the screen. He popped up on screen, too, in National Lampoon's Vacation, The Razor's Edge opposite Bill Murray, and Wildcats with Goldie Hawn. In this last decade, though, James has really made his mark in documentary film, and it's not a coincidence that it started with Alzheimer's. His 2014 film, Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me, became a landmark, unflinching but joyful look at a legend losing his memory in real time. That led to Turning Point, which followed the decades-long, mostly thankless hunt for an Alzheimer's drug, and later Augie, and a Grammy-winning producing credit on Linda Ronstadt, The Sound of My Voice. Most recently, he's behind Greg Allman, The Music of My Soul, which just hit theaters. And then there's Nancy, who I'd argue has one of the more interesting how did I end up here journeys I've come across on the show. She started at the American Museum of Natural History, of all places, building exhibitions with research scientists around the globe. From there, a personal connection to Alzheimer's, her grandmother had it, pulled her into philanthropy, and today she's a senior leader at BrightFocus Foundation, funding research not just on Alzheimer's, but macular degeneration and glaucoma. Nancy also lives with Crohn's disease, something she kept private for years, and she's become a powerful voice for people managing what she calls an unseen illness. Together, James and Nancy have spent years in the same orbit. His camera and her cause pointed at the same goal, changing how we understand, fund, and talk about the diseases that quietly reshape families. We're going to get into all of it, the making of I'll Be Me, the 4 decades and counting search for an Alzheimer's cure, Nancy's Crohn story, and yes, brotherhood, grief, and Greg Allman. So before we welcome James and Nancy Keach to Reaching Higher, let's talk to Phyllis Ferrell. Well, Phyllis, it's such a pleasure to have you back so quickly. I know you and I sat down and recorded a mere few weeks ago, and I will tell you, it's actually been one of the more popular episodes that we've had, and we've had a lot of popular episodes, so testament to you and your bubbly personality and all the great work you're doing. So thank you for being willing to do this today.
Well, thank you, Aaron. It's probably less to do with me and more to do with the topic, and I'm really excited that people are getting interested in brain health. So thanks for having me back.
Of course. Well, and the important thing is we are doing a little bit of an experiment today because at the end of our interview, I can't remember if it was after we wrapped up or actually on the podcast itself. I'll have to go back and check. You suggested that I should talk to somebody else who's also in this space, and it happened to be Nancy and James Keach. So a lot of people may be familiar with James. He's an actor. You may not be as familiar with Nancy, but she's doing amazing work, and I've already talked to her as part of the prep call. She's lovely. But the thing that we're going to do today, because we were hoping you could co-host with us, you have to go away, I think, to Europe for a few weeks, taking one for the team. But Amy Poehler, who I think a lot of people in the podcast world probably know, does a show called Good Hang. And one of the things that Amy does is she has a lot of famous people on. And when she does a phone a friend up front. And usually like Michelle Obama was on, so they talked to her brother. And Steve Carell was on, and they talked to Stephen Colbert. So, Phyllis Barkman is now the Stephen Colbert version for Nancy and James Keach. And the whole premise here is you are going to give me, I think you wanted to do multiple questions, but some questions that I will thread into the interview with them. So even though you won't be able to co-host the show with me, we will have your presence because you will be up front in the podcast, and we will bring your name up as we talk through the questions and wish that you were with us. But anyway, if you're willing to play along, tell us a little bit about how you get to know them, and then let's get into the question piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to play along. I'm definitely not as funny as Amy Poehler or Stephen Colbert. So, but I am calling in from Indiana, which has a little bit of a parks and recreation side to it. So
I love it.
It'll be okay. So actually, one of the questions that I was going to suggest is how we met. So I would ask James and Nancy how we met and how they got involved in the work that we were doing at Lilly and Alzheimer's disease. And I'll let them tell the story. But if your listeners have not seen the movie I'll Be Me, which is the documentary about Glen Campbell's final tour, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. It will be life-changing for you, whether you're facing this disease, have faced this disease, or are worried about facing this disease, or even have friends that you want to help support. It's just an incredibly courageous story that the Campbell family was willing to tell. And it's just so heartwarming and inspirational. And so I'll let James tell that story, but that's how we met. We wanted to put the film on CNN, and CNN had just started doing full-length documentaries. They had just done Blackfish, which you might remember, which was the story of the whale in captivity in Florida. And they said, well, we'll do this, but you'll never hit the readers or the viewership of Blackfish. And I think we quadrupled it in the first couple of weeks. I just think Glenn had this incredible story. And so I want you to ask James about that story.
I'm super intrigued by both. And I have to add a little side story because I think I confided in you that both my grandmother and my father suffered from dementia, may have been Alzheimer's as well, but it went undiagnosed. My dad was a huge, huge, huge Glen Campbell fan. So it kind of brings it full circle that Glen Campbell is front and center. And then we also will ask them about, not to spoil anything, but there's a Greg Allman movie, just to continue with this like legendary country sort of rock musician. So I can't wait.
Oh, and he's got a Linda Ronstadt film too. So
are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, you'll hear a whole bunch of these. So that's the reason I suggested that you talk with James and Nancy both. Obviously, they're both in this space in Alzheimer's disease. And the experience I think that he had with the Glen Campbell movie and the reception there was just transformational for him. It has completely changed the way he's pivoted from the movies, the impact that he has, and then of course Nancy with her and work and BrightFocus. So a couple of other things I would ask him about. You could ask him about being in the cave with us. So after he did the film on Glen Campbell, he actually followed my team at Lilly on a drug that we were working on. So you can ask him about being in the cave. And the two other questions that I would make sure you asked. One is why he's made obviously this change in his life and how it's impacted him. And he's this Academy Award winning director and, and producer. And here he is completely moving away and focusing on these high impact films. So that's obviously the meat of the conversation, but here's a little fun one. Maybe you throw in it in the end. Ask James about his garden.
Okay, now I am really intrigued. I mean, all of these things, it's like, I can't wait. I'm glad that the interview it's only a few days away, because otherwise I'd have a hard time waiting, because originally we talked about doing this later in July. So, and I'm a big fan of gardens. I have a small garden myself, and my parents.
Oh, wait till you hear about his garden and the story associated with it. And James is a storyteller. So I will tell you, it's going to be way more interesting than the podcast than you did with me. And it's going to be, I think, a really special time. They've become dear friends all through that first introduction around the Glen Campbell film and their commitment to Alzheimer's research and Alzheimer's researchers. And I'm just really thankful that they're in my life.
Well, I thank you for introducing me. And I can tell you, I did a prep call with Nancy the other day, and she was so sweet. She's like, and would you like me to set up some time with James so you can talk to him ahead of time? I'm like, look, I would love to spend some time talking to James. I know your time is valuable. Usually with most people, we just jump in, and if they have questions up front, we can do that. But I think it speaks to the fact that who they are as people. And it does, and it's part of the purpose of this podcast is trying to remind people that in all the craziness we live in right now, irrespective of where you fall in this world of tribalism, there are some really, really good people, including yourself, in this world that are doing good things, even though they could be laying on a beach or, doing something where they're just enjoying the back half of their careers. And so it's comforting to know that. So I'm really grateful that we'll have them on, and I'm really grateful that we get to double dip with you. And I'm so excited to be staying in touch with you. And so thank you again.
Well, I'm excited to listen to it afterwards. It's kind of actually fun to do it this way. I feel like I have a little surprise that I'm going to get to listen to later. So thank you for having them and for having me again.
Of course. Well, and as we joke, this is probably a lighter lift, although I do appreciate the help with the questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the answers are. So thank you, Phyllis.
My pleasure.
Well, James and Nancy, I am so thrilled to have you both here today. And Nancy, I had the pleasure of catching up with you a few weeks ago. James, I've had the pleasure of seeing you on the big screen and reading a lot about you over the years. And I'm really thrilled to get into our conversation today, especially as we were saying in our little pre-prep, all of the good that you've both put into the world. And if people aren't aware, they're going to be aware after this show. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for both of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So, James, I want to start with you and doing some research. This is kind of a funny one. I read that your parents, Stacy Keach Sr. and Mary Peckham, were both actors. I know that, they both had some other roles as well, but they both really strongly encouraged both you and your also famous brother, Stacy, to become doctors and lawyers. I think there was one each. Instead, you both went on to act, direct, produce numerous shows, movies, documentaries. So what led you down this chosen path in spite of the fact that your parents tried to steer you in a different direction?
Well, my brother actually was the one that got me into show business. He was at the Yale Drama School, and he said to me, you're the one that's got the talent. I said, come on, man. He said, no, you've been lying to mom and dad for years and getting away with it. So, so I wasn't that tricky, but anyway, I was an athlete, and I honestly, I wasn't getting very good grades in high school. I was kind of all over the place, except for sports. And my brother said, take up drama. And so I did, in spite of my parents' wishes for me to become a doctor. I started in the school play as well as on the football team. And then from there, I went to Northwestern and to Yale. And that was the end of my sports career too. I got hurt, and when I got my first year in college in football. So, and my mom and dad, in spite of the fact they didn't want me to go into it, they said to my brother and I, well, if you're going to stay in the business, you better be successful. The worst argument I ever had was with my father about this is art, Dad. This is really important to me. He said, no, Jimmy, that's what they call me. Jimmy, this is business. You're in show business, so you got to think that way. So at any rate, neither one, we played doctors and lawyers, and that's like the commercial. No,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is I'd say things turned out for both of you pretty well. So, and the world is definitely a better place for all of the acting that you've done and the directing and the producing. And so thank you. And I love that story. Nancy, you and I also talked about an interesting sort of start. I know it wasn't your first job, but you held a job early days at the Museum of Natural History, which is one of my favorites, probably a lot of the listeners' favorites. Since then, you spent time producing documentaries, working in leadership roles at nonprofits like the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation and BrightFocus Foundation. This is how you and I got connected through our friend Phyllis Ferrell that we'll talk about in a minute. So anyway, tell us a little bit more about that journey from the museum. I think you did a little acting before that, but the acting, then to the museum, and then into the world of documentaries and nonprofit.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having us. And you have to ask James later about his parents' request that he and his brother get hair pieces. That was a big part of their a big part of their demands, since they did go into show business. But I had the greatest job in the world at the American Museum of Natural History. I had actually gone back to school in my early 30s, went back to Columbia and then the Institute of Fine Arts in New York, and I found myself with a degree in medieval art history, in particular illuminated Islamic manuscripts. So that was very impractical, but I did love that nexus of science and art. And so I kind of targeted the Museum of Natural History as a place that I felt I could grow and figure out what I would do over the course of life. And so I had great jobs there over 11 years. I had exhibition developing and global business development, creating exhibitions in collaboration with other natural history and science museums around the globe. But I had, and I think we may talk about this later, I've had Crohn's disease since I was 12 years old, and I always hid it. And I was doing an event for the museum, I guess with the National Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, asked me to speak, and then they invited me onto their board. So I went onto the board of this organization, although my day job was natural history, working with 200 research scientists and doing great stuff. And but I loved, when I got on the board of Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, the tangible impact of that the organization funded medical research, and seeing that direct connection between what the philanthropy can do and how, new treatments, new medications could actually reach patients and change the quality of their lives. But James has heard me tell this story many times. It was so close to home, and I had suppressed telling anybody or even acknowledging to myself that I had this condition for so long that I would go to the board meetings and I would start to cry. It was just like too close to home for me. It was very emotional. So I thought I'd really like to get into this medical philanthropy area. And then a colleague from the museum who'd left the museum called, and she said, I don't know if you'd ever consider leaving the museum, but there's this incredible job that I think you'd be great at. It's with Leonard Lauder, and it's Alzheimer's, and Leonard would love you and you would love him. And so 8 interviews later, I got that job, and it was Alzheimer's, which my grandmother had had. So I had a personal connection, but it wasn't me. It wasn't my disease. So that's how I made that transition.
Well, it's funny. One of the reasons why I love doing these interviews is you can look on LinkedIn and you can read people's bios, and it's these little sort of connective tissue, pieces to the puzzle that you don't get. And so thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry about the Crohn's. We will talk about that in a little bit because I think it's an important part of the story. And I'm sorry about your grandmother. It's a horrific thing to see someone you love go through that exercise. I think I'm going to share this just because, James, you didn't hear this, but Nancy and I, when we were doing our sort of pre-call, we talked about Chuck Leavell, who I think you literally had been with the night before. So he was in the Allman Brothers early days. He plays for the Rolling Stones now. But on our conversation, this was our second interview, he confided in me and the listeners that his wife has been battling with it, and it's heartbreaking. And, he was pretty upbeat about it, considering he said that she's comfortable and that she's got the right care in place. But for anyone suffering through, I do not wish that on my worst enemy, because it is just such a horrible thing to see people go through. I do want to go into something, speaking of, very apropos, good transition. So thank you for setting me up, Nancy. You've done, James, a number of documentaries. So people, I think, are probably familiar with your film career, and I'll talk more about that in the pre-intro. But you did one with Glen Campbell, one of my dad's favorites, actually. His name, the name of the documentary is Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me. And you made the deliberate choice not to make sort of another grim Alzheimer's documentary. And actually, the backstory here is that when you and Glenn sat down to discuss, I think in his living room, he joked that he had part-timers, not Alzheimer's. So why was preserving dignity and humor so essential to changing how people see this horrible disease?
Well, when we did the movie, there hadn't been any movies about Alzheimer's. So it was very important first of all, when I was asked to do it, it took me 6 months to come around and say I wanted to do it, because the very word Alzheimer's, when Julian Raymond, who was he was producing Glen's albums, and he was working with my son Johnny on his music. He said, "Come on, James, would you do this?" And Glen has Alzheimer's, and I said, I had not done a documentary like this before. I've been in narrative film business. This was my first foray into it, and he said, "Glen's got Alzheimer's," and I went, "Oh man." I was scared of the word. I thought I was so naive at that point. I mean, I didn't think you could catch it, but I kind of did. I kind of wondered if I get around somebody with Alzheimer's. Anyway, I met Glen. I fell in love with Glen, and I thought it was going to be 7 shows, and it was 171 shows. And to be really honest about it, I saw some darkness with Glen, but I didn't see the darkness was mainly in the effect that it had on his family. It wasn't the effect that it had on Glen, except sometimes he would get very frustrated about something caught in his tooth, or he'd get worried, he'd get paranoid that somebody stole his golf clubs, which is all in the film. All of those things and all of that agitation is in the film. So Glen, because of his personality and because Alzheimer's affects everybody differently, he manifested his Alzheimer's in a way that was very upbeat. And if you can be upbeat and losing your memory, not knowing that you're on the stage, I mean, his journey was amazing. I mean, he could remember his songs. He could almost remember the lyrics, and he always, when he was on the stage, he was always positive. He loved being there, and I don't know, I actually think because Glen asked me to do this movie, it was his choice to be upbeat, and it was his choice to live his life that way. And like I said, everybody manifests themselves differently, and I was very blessed that Glen he knew when we started what he was in for, and he said, I've had a good life. God has blessed me, and I'm glad I ran into you, or you ran into me. So
I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think a little sidebar, if I remember correctly in my research, you mentioned your son Johnny, inspired by his godfather, Johnny Cash. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. We called John. We used to call him the little man in black. Yeah.
Well, it's very cool, and just lots of crazy cool connections. And so I'm going to put it in the show notes, but it does look like you can stream this in a number of different places, free on Tubi, and you can pay for YouTube or Apple TV. So we'll make sure that we link out to the documentaries as we mention them. And speaking of, before I get back to you, Nancy, I do want to talk about another one called Turning Point, where you went inside the decades-long, often unglamorous hunt for a drug that treats the underlying disease, not just the symptoms. What surprised you the most about the scientists once you got past the lab coats and into their personal why? And this is a personal one to me because I think I worked in the healthcare industry for a long time. There's a belief that a lot of the pharma companies, life science companies, are sort of all evil. There are some bad actors, we know that, but there are a lot of really good actors as well. And so I'm particularly interested to hear how you answer this.
No, we could say movie studios are evil too, by the way.
Touche.
Except at the same time, they produce movies that entertain us.
That's right.
I mean, we can say that the drug companies are evil too because the bean counters. But what I have to make money. But what I discovered is that we actually went up to Phyllis Ferrell and Nancy had conspired together to get me to go up to Eli Lilly and show the movie. And when I did, Phyllis wanted me to meet the research scientists. And so she said, James, these are, and she introduced me to Eric and a bunch of the other guys and
Manny and
Ron D'Amato and,
D'Amato.
And anyway, and so the first question I had for them, I said, so what drugs have you guys discovered? I was waiting to hear about this whole litany of all these discoveries. And they said, well, James, we've been working on, at the time we just had worked on a drug called C-megacistat, and solanezumab was the drug that they were working on currently. And they had hopes for it to pass the phase 3 of the FDA trials. And the response was, we haven't successfully come up with any drugs. I said, wait a second. How long have you been working on this? 40 years. What? I said, so this is like me producing a movie, working on it for 40 years and nobody ever seeing it. I looked at Phyllis and and I later talked to a man named Dave Ricks, who's now the chairman, and said, this is a movie. This is a movie. I said, you want to change the way people think of you guys? 40 years, $4.5 billion invested in finding a drug that has failed over and over again. And I thought, like I said, this is a movie. But the thing that was also so impressive was these guys were positive. They were doing the work, for all of us. And I don't think people really understand. These men and women dedicate their lives to finding drugs to keep us alive longer. And so I was very moved, and I think that they got my passion, because I said, I'd like to make this movie about these guys. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to be in the room when we find out that you're successful. And so they said, okay. And I had to sign all sorts of non-disclosure agreements and right. So my crew and everything else. And so we went on the journey with them, and it didn't have the outcome that we wanted it, but it certainly revealed what it's like to be a research scientist, I think.
Well, I really appreciate you telling that story. And again, I think there are a lot of people, we learned more during the pandemic as to what goes into developing a vaccine or a drug, but I think it's a very black box activity for most people. And you touched on it, which is important, and that is that I think most people don't know it's somewhere like 1 in 9 or 1 in 10 drugs at a company ever actually succeed. And they do spend billions of dollars researching it. So they have to monetize it so that they can stay in business afterwards. So you're not just researching that one drug. So it's not the cost of that one pill that you're taking. It's the cost of, 9 other failed pills and then all the other stuff that goes into it. So I'm really happy that you were able to shine a light on that process.
Yeah. Some of the good news too, when they do research on these other drugs, is they're repurposing some of them now. Mm-hmm. And so, it's like, I think that every adventure in trying to discover a drug doesn't go unappreciated or unused. It's a deduction. You got to figure out how it works. Yeah,
no, that's a critical point.
Neil deGrasse Tyson said in the movie, I think Nancy can reflect on Neil a little bit, but he said this is going to take a program like when they discovered the atomic bomb, to everybody coming together from all parts of life, with bankers and architects, everybody, not just scientists, and with just turning the box a little this way, we'll see it. But it's going to take that kind of Manhattan Project energy to find a cure for Alzheimer's, which is what, like I said, it's God's work, and Nancy's and her company, BrightFocus, is doing it for sure.
Well, like I said, thank you for that. And we're grateful. And that's a good cue to Nancy to talk a little bit about BrightFocus. We know that you fund research across not just Alzheimer's, but macular degeneration and glaucoma. And this was interesting. So these are 3 very different conditions that all come down to the brain and how we perceive the world. I did a little more research. Apparently, they're more connected than you would think. And I would love it if you can explain what connects them and what do people most often misunderstand about this link.
The fact that BrightFocus, which is 52 years old now, funds Alzheimer's, macular degeneration, and glaucoma scientific research globally, it was actually happened by accident. So it seems very clever that they're together, but it actually used to be called the American Health Assistance Foundation and funded a lot of different health conditions. Somehow these were the ones that were left, but the eye actually is part of the brain. Attached through the optic nerve. So they are literally connected and function together. And there's lots of crossover research. We call it common features of neurodegeneration. We look at the common features between the eye and the brain and different neurodegenerative conditions. But a great example is that the eye is being used now to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. You can look through the eye and see protein deposits that are common in Alzheimer's. And that's just one example of how they're connected. But I think what people resonate more with than the scientific connections is that these are the most common diseases of aging. And so we age, aging is the highest risk factor, for example, for Alzheimer's. We're aging. And also that these are the diseases that people fear the most: loss of sight and loss of mind.
Mhm.
So we actually had a tagline, we don't use it that much, but cure in mind, cure in sight. And so if you think about it, losing your vision and losing your hearing are risk factors actually for Alzheimer's. And just to comment on what James said before, and Phyllis, who worked for Lilly for many years, and most of the research scientists at Lilly, including the now president or CEO, Dave Ricks, have Alzheimer's in their family. The public doesn't always think about that, but most of the people have Alzheimer's or a vision disorder in their families. So it's just a word of warning for demonizing an entire industry due to the behaviors of a few bad actors, because most of the people that we've met anyway, and Phyllis is a great example, are so passionate about this work to try to understand and find treatments, and pharmacological and non-pharmacological. So I'll stop there. But
well, I appreciate that, and we've invoked Phyllis a number of times, and I don't know if the two of you know this, but she and I did sit down and actually filmed a little 5-minute pre-intro as well, so that we could tee up the questions. And she was the inspiration. And for those listening in, Phyllis was originally supposed to be co-hosting this with me. She's traveling, taking one for the team to Scotland, and so she wasn't able to join us. So we thought, through the power of editing, we would bring her in for the initial segment where I talked to her, and then I talked to the three of you, or the two of you. The three of us would have a conversation. I do want to wrap up the Alzheimer's piece, and then we'll keep moving. So the field has shifted from only treating symptoms to the FDA-approved therapies targeting amyloid. So from where you each sit, film and foundation, does this moment feel like genuine hope, cautious optimism, and how do you talk to families about the difference? And so, James, maybe I'll start with you, and then we'll wrap with Nancy on this.
Well, I would say any progress is good. And, getting there, I mean, I think it's kind of like the AIDS work. Eventually it was a cocktail of drugs. And from what I've understood from Nancy and the scientists that I talked to, that it's probably going to be that. I mean, and it's the early detection that's very, very exciting. And, for those of us who are older, it's a little more daunting because you're probably a little bit more progressed if you're in your 70s or 80s, and than you are when you're in your 50s. And I think that they're now able to, Nancy can weigh in on this a little bit more specifically, weigh in on the discovery through, she was talking about the eye, through amyloid blood tests, and discover that you have it early. And they have some drugs now that are actually reducing it, or actually, from what I understand, turning it backwards, making it go reverse. So that would be very exciting. Am I correct?
Yeah,
Nancy?
amazing.
No,
we're not
giving
actually
too much hope as usual.
James is an optimist. It's not reversing, but yeah, I mean, I would extend James's answer. Slowing down the progression,
slowing the progress down. I mean, the hope is ultimately, obviously, unfortunately, we are all going to die. And hopefully we don't die from Alzheimer's or losing our sight. Hopefully it's some other thing that takes us out. But at any rate, I think the hope is that it'll slow it down, and we'll have something else to deal with, but it won't be that.
Yeah, if we could all just peacefully die in our sleep at age 105, then that would be a lovely thing,
awesome,
right?
wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
We're working on that.
You are. Well, and the two of you are collectively making a lot of progress on that. So I guess, Nancy, any other additional thoughts on what James has said on the particular topic?
I would just say that there's 100% genuine hope and cautious optimism, but genuine hope. When we were working on the Glen Campbell movie, and we went on the Hill to Washington, the NIH was dedicating $400 million towards Alzheimer's research. That was around 2013, I think, when we went there. And by the time before the funding cuts at the NIH with the recent administration, 10 years later, we have the NIH or the NIA had committed $4 billion for Alzheimer's research. So this didn't happen, by accident. Our country invested a tremendous amount of money and effort and time into understanding and treating Alzheimer's better. And now, yes, we have 2 FDA approved, what they call monoclonal antibodies that actually do slow progression. So they are considered disease modifying. And we have a new drug that was just approved for Alzheimer's agitation. We have diagnostic blood tests, as James was mentioning, that can detect the 2 proteins associated with Alzheimer's, amyloid and tau, and a lot of devices in the pipeline. I think there are, I'm going to hope this is correct, about 158 drugs being tested currently this year in clinical trials, in like 180 something clinical trials. So there's absolutely genuine hope. Is there a miracle drug that's going to go bing and just cure it? That's why the cautious optimism comes in. No, that's not going to happen, unfortunately. But there's a huge amount of progress now after decades of no progress at all. So it's very hopeful time, kind of where cancer was, a few decades ago.
Yeah, it seems like it. And I feel more optimistic than I've ever felt. And it's nice to hear from the two of you who have invested a tremendous amount of time in this space. I was going to ask you a question about favorite documentaries. I realize I want to actually do that after we talk a little bit about your latest. And so, Nancy, I do want to drill into the Crohn's disease piece that you had referenced earlier. You've lived with it since you were 12. I think you had said 7th grade. And because of the fact that, unfortunately, for those that suffer through it, it's an invisible chronic illness, like invisible in quotes, because people tend not to see it. For people that have managed quietly for a lifetime, what do you wish more people, including the healthy ones in someone's life, understood more about the daily reality of Crohn's?
That's such a good question. I guess I would say, first of all, and this is probably true for a lot of diseases that you would consider create an unseen disability, as you said, unseen, which someone said that term to me, and I thought about it for years. What does that mean? First of all, we're always in pain. People kind of think that to have a chronic illness or pain means that the pain comes once in a while and goes away, and so that you occasionally have some discomfort. Or so I think it would be amazing if people actually realized this is an every minute of your life thing. Including family members who you kind of can't imagine what it is. I think the other thing is, I remember when I was much younger, it's probably like 3 decades ago, I was with my wonderful doctor in New York, Ellen Sherrill, and she said, people always say people with Crohn's disease, it's because they're stressed and, depressed. And she said, you'd be depressed too if you were going to the bathroom 19 times a day. And so, as unglamorous as this is to say, people with ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, IBS, these intestinal things are literally going to the bathroom, all day long. And it's not something people talk about, and it's not something that people see, and it sure as hell is something we try to mask and hide. So if I was going to say something that I think could make an impact, it's that's what's really going on with us. You're on the golf course, you're in the course of your day in a board meeting, and you have to, it's very humbling. It's very undignified. And so that's, I think, and it's exhausting. And so what I would say to people is be kind. I mean, I would say that in general, be kind, because people are going through all kinds of conditions and feelings that you don't realize in their daily lives.
Well, and the sad thing is that I've had 3 children that have all suffered through some level of mental health problems. And people don't tell people with cancer, for the most part, to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And where I'm going with this is, you just said it's somewhat embarrassing and it's disruptive, but it's like you have a disease just like someone else does. And the manifestation happens to be that you do have to get up and go to the bathroom. So thank you for sharing your story. And hopefully that will let people know that we do need to treat people with dignity and be more sensitive to the fact that we just don't know what people are going through. So, hopefully you're getting some relief. And I know that's another area that there are some breakthroughs these days. We won't dive too deep into that. But anyway, I appreciate you sharing that. I do want to talk about something that we talked about up front. And so this was Greg Allman's, the documentary that you just did. So a lot of people are familiar with a band called the Allman Brothers, one of the OGs of that crossover, I think, of rock and country and blues. And you have this documentary called Greg Allman, The Music of My Soul, and it just hit theaters, I want to say a week or two ago. I want to say on the 17th, maybe, of June, if I'm remembering correctly. James, you said that you connected to Greg through his bond with his brother, Dwayne, and your own relationship with your brother, Stacy, sort of like you had similar relationships. And you talked about Stacy earlier. So how much of this film was really about the brotherhood and the grief underneath the music?
Well, it was all about the brotherhood, both the brotherhood of Greg and Dwayne and the brotherhood of Greg and the rest of the band members, and also the acceptance of the brothers, the interracial brotherhood that Greg manifested in all his bands. But I think at the end of the day, this brotherhood story is about the early childhood trauma that they felt. And I think I said in some interview that the thought of losing my brother at 20 years old, when both of us were living together, I was directing Stacy in shows, and we were at Yale together. He was one of my teachers. I was a student there. And the idea of losing him at that point, as Greg lost his brother Dwayne, was devastating. And in some ways, my brother's 7 years older than I am. So he was like a second father to me at many times in my life. And that was Greg's journey as well, except in his case, his father was murdered. So Dwayne, de facto, became the male role model because his mother never remarried. So yeah, it was about brotherhood, but it was more about the trauma that they suffered when they were kids, and that led to a lot of addiction, a lot of pain in his life. His music, his blues became even deeper. His voice resonated that pain when he sang, and his songs reflected it that he wrote. Brotherhood. Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned the addiction piece as well. And I think, this is another one of those where if you don't understand it, you don't understand it. We've had a lot of addiction in our broader family. You describe it in the film as a symptom of something else, numbing a feeling you can't deal with. And as you mentioned, the childhood trauma obviously was quite traumatic there. So after spending years inside Greg's story of 15 rehabs and hard-won sobriety, how did making this film change your own understanding of addiction?
Well, it reinforced my understanding of addiction. I've had addiction in my family most of my adult life. And in fact, to be honest about it, I went through it when I was a young actor in Hollywood. I mean, coke was everywhere. The studio was providing it, literally. And I got hooked for about a year, and I stopped everything because I realized it was going to cost me everything if I didn't. And I was one of the fortunate ones, but I was around the AA program and have been around the 12-step programs all these years. And I've learned a lot through the pain and suffering of a lot of friends of mine, a lot of people in the business. And I've lost friends to drug addiction. And it is a symptom of something else, and to be honest with you, America is addicted. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about we get up every morning and we drink coffee, and I mean, it's like we're always looking for something to make it better. And when you have despair and you have depression, and the depression is a disease, it's dis-ease, literally. And when you suffer from depression and you suffer from these things, you look for things to numb yourself, to make it better, because for some people it becomes unbearable. And those people are the ones that jump out of buildings, You know, they can't take the sound of their own wheels. It's literally driving them crazy, you know? And so, I mean, we have 90,000 thoughts a day, I would say, and most of them are negative. And either we hold on to those thoughts. It's like I would talk to an actor if I was talking about directing a scene. And I said, don't listen to that critic out there. That critic out there is lying to you. It's not, you know, you're not failing. You're not doing it wrong. It's not. But that voice sometimes can get so loud that it really messes people up. And they say, oh, God, I take a hit, man, and I feel like a new man. Well, unfortunately, then the new man wants a hit. And the cycle becomes a vicious cycle and takes a lot of people out, unfortunately. Unfortunately, right now, I think there's more acceptance of mental health issues. And the only way we're only as sick as our secrets, literally. And so for Nancy to talk about her Crohn's, for people, for you just a few minutes ago to say you've dealt with mental health issues in your family, it creates a conversation. Going back to Glenn, I used to say to Glenn, so how's the Alzheimer's? People around him would freak out when I would say that. I said, I did it because Glenn knows he's got it. It's like when somebody has cancer, you say, how's the cancer? How are you feeling? If you stuff it down and pretend it's not there, well, it just makes them sicker and it makes them more ashamed. So anyway, I could go on about this, but I get very passionate about helping people with
No, I think I really appreciate you saying that on a lot of different fronts, because it is, when it is tucked away and you don't have the conversation, it's like having a nightmare at night and you are like, oh my gosh, this is so real. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, that was just a nightmare. And I think when you are able to talk about your addiction, your disease, and shed light on it, and people can have context of what you're going through and how you feel about it, it can make a huge difference. And Nancy, it looked like you wanted to say something.
No, I love listening to James. He does so much with the movies that he's done, and I loved what Phyllis said about him in her podcast, that he took this career where he did, Walk the Line and Wildcats and Armed and Dangerous comedies and funny things, and after Walk the Line, then just turn to these documentaries that all are about these issues, that are about addictions and disease and neurodegeneration, the brain and people's suffering. But he does it in a way that takes music and joy. So it makes it palatable for us to feel our pain, because we're experiencing it through the arts, really. So that's another show, but how the arts and the brain connect.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Well, you did me a huge favor, and we'll get to the fact that you do have a podcast in a minute, which is why you're so good at helping us transition. I did want to loop back to the documentary conversation, because you have done a number of them, some together, I think some individually. So out of all of them that you've made, which is your favorite and why? And then second part of the question, how do you stay positive amidst covering such heavy topics like addiction, ALS, and Alzheimer's? So Nancy, why don't we start with you, and then we'll bounce to James.
It's like, selecting one of your children. But I would say my favorite is Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me, because that's how James and I met. He interviewed me for the movie, because I was in drug development for Alzheimer's. But because it takes this and brings music and joy and family. He traveled with his 3 of his kids in the band and his wonderful wife, Kim, who we're still very close with, Kim Campbell. But also the Linda Ronstadt film. She was brilliant. She's, just intellectually brilliant, musically brilliant. She's not shy about her opinions, and she's suffering from some type of a Parkinsonian illness. It's probably primary supranuclear palsy, but it's interesting to note that these diagnoses are not always so clear cut. So, and James has brought that into these films. So, but I'd say those two. And of course, right now I'm all about Greg Allman. They were my favorite band in high school. I always say they got me through high school. So it's been incredible to watch these intimate interviews with Gregg and go inside his head. And he's just not bad to look at either.
Watch out, James.
Yeah. Well, you're not bad to look at either, Nancy.
Yeah, neither are you.
Yeah. We're having a moment here. I love it. So, James, how about you? What's your favorite? Pick your favorite child.
my favorite is going to be the next one.
I like it. That's a good answer.
You know, seriously, they as Nancy said, they're all like your children, and you know, how can you pick one? Each one of them has a different. You know, when I make a document, when I do it, I discover something about me, and each one of these people have been my teacher. You know, they teach me about so many things, and about humanity and their humanity and what their struggles are. And what I constantly try to do is to make them human, like you and me and Nancy, and we put our pants on one leg at a time. And, you know, it's to create that feeling that when you're watching that film, you're going, wow, that guy, he's just like me, or she's just like me. She has the same insecurities, and you know, and just because you're a movie star or you're a rock star, it doesn't mean that you're not suffering. It doesn't mean that you have a better life. It's just bullshit. Excuse me. It just really.
We're allowed to swear on this show,
Well,
so I appreciate
know,
that.
but it's just, you know, you know, that's why I make the films, is for people to see themselves, to learn something, to be entertained, to appreciate these people, but to also appreciate themselves. When they finish the film, they're feeling something. They're feeling there's something, you know, that, and, you know, it's like in the Greg Allman situation, or I remember when we made Walk the Line years ago, I had a friend who was on the verge of breaking up with her husband, and Walk the Line is about forgiveness. It's about forgiveness. And she said, James, thank you for making this movie, for developing it and getting it on the screen. He said, it has inspired me to stay in my marriage and to forgive my husband for the
amazing
infidelity that he'd had, you know, and a lot of it was had to do with faith and similar relationships. But, you know, John and June Cash were not perfect.
No, not by a long shot.
Not by a long shot. Anyway.
The crazy thing, just to editorialize a little bit here, is, so I mentioned my dad, who is no longer with us, but 3 of his favorite bands of all time. So Glen Campbell, Johnny Cash, Linda Ronstadt. And so as I was doing research for this, I was like, oh, my dad, like, you know, hopefully he's looking over my shoulder right now, because he would be so proud that we're having this conversation. Right. And I love that you share that. And I love that, you know, that movie was a thing that made that impact on one of your friends' lives, because doesn't that feel good that that was the case?
Yeah, it's great. You know, when Nancy and I worked on Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me, we would do screenings all over the country. And I don't know how many we did. We did a lot, hundreds, as I recall. You know, we didn't go to all of them, but there were. Anyway, I had people come up to me and say, I want to thank you, Mr. Keach. And I said, why? I said, you've allowed me to be seen. These were people with Alzheimer's.
Oh, wow.
And so, and it's just, and so people now understand what I'm going through because of you showed Glenn. And I want to thank Mr. Campbell for showing this, you know, and so I would always say, then Glenn and I would always talk about no shame in our game, man. And what I said with Johnny Cash, Johnny said, James, tell the gnarly truth. Just tell the gnarly truth. So, you know, I've been very blessed to work with all these people and to have them trust me to tell their stories. And hopefully I'll someone else will find me, or I'll find them, and I'll do another one. I love doing it. It's a lot harder than making documentaries than making narrative films.
I can only imagine. My wife and I just started watching The American Revolution, which is a very different type of documentary, but you think about everything that goes into it. And I do believe, James, that you are chosen, meaning people are chosen for certain, you know, roles. And clearly this was your role, and whether you wanted it or not. And we're all grateful and thankful that you did.
Well, I'm starting to believe that I'm starting to believe that, I've done this now for, I don't know, 15 years, Nancy, how long? Yeah. And I every morning I get up, I'm grateful that I get to do it.
Well, you do a great job at it, and I do believe we are chosen. And so, speaking of, I'm going to make one more transition into Nancy. Clearly, you're chosen to be a podcaster in addition to all the other things you do. You have a lovely voice. You have a lovely way about saying things. You have a new podcast called Let's Talk Alzheimer's. It launched last month, I think, or now 2 months ago, since we're in the first day of July here recording this. And what made it now the right moment to step in front of the mic yourself, and what conversations are you hoping to have that aren't happening anywhere else?
I've been a podcaster for about 3 weeks now.
I love it.
So yeah, I launched June 11th, I think, but I've been doing a program called Zoom In on Dementia and Alzheimer's for a little over 3 years, and that's what started. And I started it just because I was trying to figure out a way. BrightFocus, I'll put in a shameless plug, but has funded over $330 million in research globally, and young researchers. So we focus on filling the pipeline of researchers. And then we have about 430,000 donor households across the U.S. that, support us with their $10 and their $25 contributions. We don't have our billionaire. We don't have a billionaire supporting this foundation. So I was thinking, because I've been with BrightFocus 10 years now, but so after like 7 years, I thought, how do we get value to the donors, right? We can't offer access to a special doctor or a hospital, and I thought, well, we should be sharing the research that we fund with them. We should be getting the greatest, most topmost experts in the world, and let people ask them questions directly. So that was how, and then Lilly, Biogen, Genentech, ASI came in and helped sponsor that. So it was like it is like an Ask the Expert series. We've done about 44 episodes of that now on specific topics. So the last week we did agitation, for example. James was talking about Glen's agitation, Glen walking around the apartment banging his golf club in frustration, or using his daughter's Tiffany earring to try to get something out of his teeth. And, people are suffering with these things. So we'll get an expert in agitation to come in and answer people's questions. So we've been doing that program. It's brightfocus.org/zoom in. We've done 44 episodes over a little over 3 years, and we've had about 7.7 million views. So I was shocked by that. I just shocked about the, people show up, usually about 300 or 400 people live, and then we edit it and send it out for free. And so that really turned me on, to be honest. And then, so after doing it for a couple of years, just to reach more people, more audience who maybe can't watch it on YouTube or Zoom, or want to listen while they're driving, or we've created Let's Talk Alzheimer's, the podcast, so that we can reach people, while they're gardening or doing whatever they do. And that's an audio and video podcast. So it's been 3 weeks. We've had about 85,000 views there. So it's really exciting. And I just love it. And it's true. I mean, a lot of the wonderful things I've been able to do for people in my life have come not by accident, but not planned. The roles I had at the museum didn't even exist when I was in school. So, I love your chosen thing.
You are clearly chosen, and congratulations on the success. We will make sure that we link to both of those in the show notes as
Thank
well.
you.
I sort of pre-mentioned this, that Phyllis had a few questions, and we stole this from Amy Poehler, by the way. Amy Poehler, from Parks and Rec and other Saturday Night Live, has a podcast that she calls Good Hang. And one of the things she always has is a friend or a relative of the guest. And she asked them, what question or questions would you like to ask? And so she leaned into the ones for James, although you can feel free to chime in. And then I have a few like fun questions, and then we'll wrap up. She did want me to ask you about being in the cave. Hopefully that rings a bell.
Cave, that was, first of all, it was one of the most, the anticipatory excitement was palpable on everybody's part. The cave was where all the scientists came together, and they were given the readout, the computer readout, of whether they passed the FDA or not, whether their drug worked or not. And they called it the cave. And I was only allowed to bring Alex Exline, who's been with me forever as cinematographer, and myself. were allowed in the cave. And we photographed everybody beforehand, and they were all excited, and we got all their reactions. You know, what do you think's going to happen? And then we got the news, and we were filming them, that the drug solanezumab didn't work. And it was absolutely shocking and devastating. And it's like I talked earlier about 40 years of not having a drug. Well, this was 41 years and not having a drug. And this is their life's work. But, you know, and there were tears and there was shock. And unfortunately, right after that, there were a whole group of people, because they anticipated it was going to work. But then there was this whole machine that was set up, and there was a lot of people that were employed to get ready for this thing to work. And they were all laid off. They had to be, because it wasn't going to work. It was devastating in so many ways. I felt very privileged to have witnessed that, and it forever made me understand what drug discovery is about, and what it's not about. It's not about gouging the patient of their money. It's just not. They're doing the work.
Yep.
You know, so it was a mind blower, to be honest with you.
I can only imagine it. I mean, thank you for sharing that very soulful story, because I think
one more thing.
Please keep going. Yeah,
we couldn't talk about it for 2 months.
Oh,
because
that's the worst part.
They had to wait to reveal it, because and part of it would be that if I said something, that stock would have gone straight down,
right,
and they would have come looking for me. You know,
yeah, that's anyway. Even doubly worse. So, well, thank you for sharing that. Hopefully, this next one's a little bit more lighter. Although I know a little bit more to this story. So, Nancy mentioned, not Nancy, she's the one who's here. Phyllis mentioned your garden and your girls. Can you share more about the significance of both in your life?
My garden is my church. It's like Nancy and we have unfortunately our home burned down, but the garden survived, and so did the 22 chickens. You know, they weren't fried chicken.
Our girls.
Your girls.
Yes,
girls.
We called them Pamela Anderson, Raquel Welch, Jara Gabor. We were hoping our girls would be big breasted, so that's why Phyllis.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what a beautiful miracle that this is your cathedral, that it did last, and that your girls were safe, and fortunately, at least at this point, did not become fried chicken. So that's a fun story, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. They're still producing many eggs.
Well, good for them.
Yeah.
And thank you, Phyllis, for teeing some of those up. So 3 final questions. This is for both of you. These are the sort of lighter hearted. And Nancy, you mentioned earlier, like, I'm going to do the shameless plug. That's part of what this is about, is when people are doing good things and putting good out there, then this is where they get to do the shameless plugs. But I do want to talk a little bit about the fact that obviously you've done a lot of making of documentaries together. What else do the two of you like to do for fun? And this isn't a test to see if you both answered the same way, because I'm sure you both have different things. So, James, you want to answer that first?
Well, we like to fish, fly fish.
I like that.
We like to play golf. We like to cook. She cooks. I'm her sous chef.
Oh, nice.
We like to walk through the garden, and Nancy especially likes to go walk through the garden and pick blueberries and strawberries. And, you know, she's a New York girl, so when she came to California and discovered the garden, I'll let her talk about it, but it was like, I think it blew her mind, you know.
I love that. Nancy, how about you?
Yeah, it totally blows my mind. No, the gardening, taking stuff that grows, and James is a master gardener, so it's all organic, but I never cooked before, because I've always worked like 24/7. And, but then he created this garden. So just to explain, it's like 45 different types of fruit trees, including mulberries and almonds and apricots and cherries and apples and avocados, and on and on. So he's right. I'm a girl from New York. My whole life, I couldn't have imagined this life, and it's amazing. But taking that stuff, artichokes, and that he grows in the earth, and then alchemically transforming it into food. That's what cooking is for me. It's like alchemy. It's been very emotionally eye-opening because it's something we love to do together and it's really magical. And then we give a lot of it away because we can't possibly eat that much. And I certainly can't because I can't eat high fiber stuff, and everything that comes out of the garden's high fiber. So then we give it to our friends, and people have started to ask if they can buy it. And no, you can't. You have to just be on the gifting end. So it's magic. But yeah, golfing, we do a lot of golf. He also taught me how to play golf. So it's
She's
been
good.
a miraculous change of life.
I am not surprised. I'm trying to get my wife involved. I'm actually going to play this afternoon. So I love to hear that you both are. Yeah.
This is good. Nancy's driving.
We have to play with
down
each
the
other.
fairway. She hits like,
Deal.
we play 18 holes. She hits 16 fairways.
I mean,
Seriously.
Yeah,
That's what
but
it's
I
all
don't get
about,
any
right?
pars. It's,
No,
but I
you
have
don't
fun.
come. Actually, you
They'll
got 2 pars the other
James
day.
always says you play golf. So we
That's
have enough
right.
stress. So we just try to, well, I anyway, try to enjoy it. James gets much more stressed about it.
Yeah.
I love that you do it together, though. I love that you do all of those things together, and a lot of those are my favorite things. And trying to, in our second phase of our life, my wife and I are looking at like what are those things that we can do together, and so golfing will definitely be one. I do want to ask you this impossible question. We talked about the choosing, your favorite child earlier, and I'll tell you guys a funny little anecdote. I had the pleasure of interviewing Katie Couric at one point in time, and Katie's interviewed a few pretty, important people over the course of her life. I know you've both met important people. Who has impressed you the most? And so I asked Katie who her favorite interview was, and she yelled at me because she's like, that's not a fair question to ask. But I would love to know from the two of you, Nancy, who's the person that has most impressed you that you've ever met?
So I'm going to cheat and because of some things that came up today. So first I was on the board for a couple of years, very brief time, of the Martha Graham Dance Company. And so that was when Martha Graham was still alive around 1990, 91. And I actually had pulled up before the podcast this quote of hers. She wrote, "I did not choose," or she said, "I did not choose. I was chosen to be a dancer. And with that, you live all your life." And since you brought it up, I had to say that. And James was chosen, and Aaron, you're chosen. And so follow that path that brings you joy. And then Neil deGrasse Tyson, I worked for several years with at the museum. And both of these people, they actually are original thinkers. And it's so compelling. And he, in Turning Point, says, there's no failure in science. You don't fail. That drug trial, which was called Expedition 3, didn't meet its endpoints, but from every scientific effort we learn what doesn't. From learning what doesn't work, we learn what does work. And Neil says something about standing on the shoulders of the giants who worked before. And those researchers, Patrick May, I'll mention him, and Rhonda Matos and Eric Seamers and all the team at Lilly and everywhere who do this scientific work and never see a drug come to market. The drugs that do come to market come from those folks. So, and Neil was just amazing in the things he talks about. But I'm also I need to do a shout out here. Jackson Browne was in a couple of James's films. He was in, I can't remember, was he into the David Crosby movie? But he was in the Linda Ronstadt movie extensively. James ended up traveling with Jackson and Linda down to her grandfather's pueblo in Mexico. And then Jackson is also really pivotal in the Greg Allman documentary. So, and I only met him really briefly, but he really blows me away. And so I have to do this shout out to Jackson. Jackson, you have to let James do your documentary.
You heard it here first. I love it.
Incredible. And Jackson's music and the way he's lived his life and the way he is on stage is so touching. And you'll see it in the Greg Allman documentary. They sing together, and the way they look at each other and respect each other as men and as artists, it's so inspiring and so beautiful. So I'll say Jackson Browne this moment, and Jackson, please let James do your documentary.
I love it. James, how about you?
What the person that I've met in my life
that's impressed you the most? Because I know, both of you have, but you've worked with some, you mentioned Johnny Cash earlier and lots of other famous musicians. You've been in the music industry the film industry for a long time. So who's blown you away?
I think for me, I've been blessed to know Linda and Johnny and Glenn, but the man who most impressed me, and it was Colin Powell. Colin Powell was, before I met him, I'd read his books, and I just had this incredible respect for he's a warrior, he's an intellect, he's a kind man. He loves his daughter, his wife. He was the kind of man that I would want to be, and I like the whole warrior ethos. I mean, he certainly understood that. And when I met him several times and spent time talking with him. And I asked him about the weapons of mass destruction. And he said, and he looked at me and he said, and he taught me something when he said this. He said, I think we have to get over this. He said, we were all mistaken. We all got the wrong information, and we have to move on. And that's, and for me, that's what life is about. Is as big a bad with that war that was caused from that, as traumatic as that was to the world. I don't know. It just really impressed me that he didn't shy away from telling the truth. He said, we messed up. He said, but our intelligence did. Anyway, that isn't why. That moment, though, taught me something. It taught me that we can all make mistakes, even as giant as that, and we have to move on. We just do. And that's the nature of life. So
yeah, no, he was a great man, and we could use more of him in the political world these days.
Can I cheat further, Aaron, for a second?
Please do.
Say that
you can do anything you want, Nancy. Come on.
James and I also have the great privilege of knowing and being dear friends with H.R. McMaster, who's in that same vein of Colin Powell, and he is so brilliant. Like a photographic memory, but also we went to something at his home last year, and he talked about all people's coming together and working together, and in this divisive time. And so he's another, I'm sure James would want to call out.
Totally. Totally.
Such a great leader.
Yeah.
Well, great choices. We'll wrap up with this final one, back to this sort of selfish plug. But I always like to give the guests the opportunity to tell people where to find you, where to engage with you, maybe support the work that you're doing. Nancy, you want to start?
So BrightFocus is BrightFocus Foundation, brightfocus.org. And the two programs to look for there are Let's Talk Alzheimer's and Zoom In on Dementia and Alzheimer's. So I'll give those as a plug. And
perfect.
James's movies, well, his company's pchfilms.com. But
she took the words right out of my mouth.
I love it.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and then we are imploring everyone to go see the documentary, which I'm going to try to go see it this weekend. I love and hate that when movies don't come out in streaming immediately, because I got lazy over the last few years, but we are going to go. We have to go over to Oakland. I live in the East Bay, and so we'll make a point of going to see that because I'm really excited about checking it out.
Yeah, it'll be streaming very soon. It'll be streaming very, very soon.
Yeah, I just don't want to wait. I don't have the patience to wait. I almost saw it last weekend and we ran out of runway, but I will make a point of seeing it this holiday weekend.
Good. Okay.
Well, thank you both. Great conversation. Thank you for being so honest and genuine, and thank you for all you do, because clearly you put a tremendous amount of good in the world. I know you'll continue to do that, and it's been an honor to meet and talk with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks, you. Aaron. And thanks, Phyllis.
Yes, thank you, Phyllis.